In today's episode, we've got divine firefighting, salty Sadducees, and the longest sermon in history. It's time for your Jewish week. Hey everyone, welcome to your Jewish week, the podcast for everything Jewish in the week ahead. I'm Rabbi Dovey. As always, this podcast is produced by Chabad.org and dedicated to all our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. May Hashem keep them safe from all harm, and may all the hostages finally be freed to return to their families and loved ones. Today is Sunday, the 26th of Teves. If you're in the New York City area, the latest time to read the morning Shema this week is going to be at 9:39 a.m., and Shabbat candlelighting will be at 4:38 p.m. As always, halachic times for your location can be found quickly and easily at Chabad.org/times. Kicking things off with the weekly Torah portion, this week's Parsha has one of the cutest names of them all, Parshas Bo. There are only two portions with single-syllable names, and this is one of them. Aside from having a cool name, this Parsha is also packed with excitement and triumph, so let's dive in. We open Sunday's reading right where we left off last week, in the aftermath of plague number 7. At this point, the resolve of the Egyptian people is starting to crack severely. Even Pharaoh's own servants are like, dude, haven't you realized the whole country is pretty much trashed? But in an unsettling parallel to the enemies the Jewish people face today, Pharaoh's stubbornness and Jew hatred blinds him to his own people's suffering. He makes an insincere attempt to negotiate, demanding that the Jews leave their children behind as hostages, again, eerily familiar to modern readers. But as Jews should, Moshe and Aaron stand their ground, and the 8th plague of locust begins. In a matter of days, Egypt's food supply is devastated. Next comes the plague of darkness, paralyzing the Egyptians with supernaturally thick blackness. Tuesday's reading will see Pharaoh make one last attempt at negotiating, which Moshe flatly refuses, which means it's time for plague number 10, an absolute horror, the worst of them all. But first, in Wednesday and Thursday's reading, God will instruct the Jewish people in the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, establishing a monthly calendar based on the phases of the moon. He'll also outline the process of preparing the Pesach offering and painting its blood on their doorpost to safeguard themselves from the plague. In Friday's reading, one of the most terrifying nights in human history begins. At midnight exactly, every firstborn Egyptian dies, throwing the entire country into an uproar. The enemy's back is broken. Pharaoh himself runs to Moshe and demands that the Jewish people leave. And they will, but not at night like runaway slaves slinking off. They will leave proudly in broad daylight, taking with them all the wealth of the Egyptian people. In the final reading of this week, God gives the Jews a number of commandments to commemorate their miraculous redemption from Egypt. We continue to do these mitzvos to this day, and they give us confidence that in our times as well, we will witness God's salvation with the imminent coming of Mashiach. Parshas Bo, like its name, is on the short side. It's only got 105 verses, 16 less than last week. The traditional memory key for this week is the name Yimna, who is one of the sons of Asher. As always, check out the link in the show notes for more insight into this week's keys. Moving on to the weekly Tanya, it's been a little over a month since we first joined the Alter Rebbe on this journey, and with many of the foundational ideas already laid out, we're going to really start pulling things together this week. In Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday's reading, the Tanya will explain how love and fear are truly within reach of every Jew, and outline the assistance that God gives us in this regard. Starting Wednesday, we'll begin a deeper dive into why exactly Jews have this special power. The Alter Rebbe will introduce us to the Ava Mesuteres, the unshakable love for God that we all have hidden within us. He'll touch upon what this love is, how we got it, and along the way, we'll learn just how unbelievably special your soul really is. That's going to take us all the way to the end of the week and beyond, and it's a wild ride. If you learn these Tanya portions properly, you will 100% without a doubt walk away with a totally different perspective on your fellow Jews, even the annoying ones. Moving on to Rambam, the 3-chapter-a-day and Sefer HaMitzvos crowd are going to be continuing on with the laws of claims and claimants all the way through to Wednesday. You'll be discussing various legal principles and methods of adjudicating disputes. If you claim a certain object is yours, for example, can we assume you're telling the truth? Well, it depends what it is. Is it something you'd typically be able to afford? Is it an animal or servant that could move on its own? Do you have any witnesses who saw it in your possession? What if someone else claims it was his? Who do we trust? All that belongs under the umbrella of claims and claimants. Wednesday, we'll start the laws of inheritance, and that's going to take us all the way till Shabbat, when we'll wrap up and get ready to start a new set of laws on Sunday. And in the 1-chapter-a-day track, we'll spend most of the week finishing up our 3-week dive into the laws of Metame, Mishkav, Umoshav. We'll explain when you can and cannot assume that something is pure, and we'll be introduced to the 2 general categories of people: an Am Haaretz, who has no knowledge of the laws of impurity and is assumed to be impure, and a Chaver, who is known to be knowledgeable and scrupulous and can thus be relied upon. There are also certain times and circumstances when we can assume things are pure, and we'll touch upon those as well. Friday, we'll crack open a new set of laws, Sha'ar Avos Hatuma, which covers other kinds of impurity caused by certain animal corpses and bodily fluids. As always, if you'd like to learn more about anything you just heard, or if you're interested in joining one of the daily study cycles, check out the show notes for links and resources. All right, with the weekly overview done, it's time to take it day by day. Monday, the 27th of Teves, marks the yahrzeit of Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch in the year 1888. Rabbi Hirsch lived in Germany during a time when the values of the so-called Enlightenment had saturated the hearts and minds of the young generation. Biblical criticism, atheism, and secularization were rampant. In the midst of this flood of coldness towards religion, Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch stood up for traditional Judaism. He argued that the laws of the Torah were eternal and fought fire with fire, penning detailed responses to the anti-religious philosophical arguments that were in vogue at the time. Moving on to Tuesday, we've got a holiday that was established way back in the times of the Talmud. But first, we're going to need a bit of background. When God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai, he gave it in 2 parts: the written Torah, otherwise known as the 5 books of Moses, and the oral Torah. The written Torah is extremely concise and concentrated. The oral Torah, passed down through thousands of years of authentic tradition, teaches us how to interpret the written Torah and apply its laws to our lives. Now, at various points throughout history, there have been Jews who denied the authenticity of the oral tradition. Sometimes it was on philosophical grounds, but often it had more to do with the fact that denying the oral Torah makes life a whole lot easier, because then you can just interpret the written Torah however you want. And when you've got that kind of license, you can justify pretty much whatever you want to do. One of the big proponents of this concept was a group called the Tziddukim. In English, for some reason, that word gets pronounced as Sadducees, which bears pretty much no resemblance to the original word, but I digress. The Sadducees were around for a while, and at times they got very influential. Sometimes they even infiltrated the Sanhedrin, the high court, making it totally corrupt. Well, on the 28th of Teves, in the year 81 before the Common Era, the sage Shimon ben Shattach successfully ousted the Sadducees from the Sanhedrin. This was a major stride for Torah-true Judaism, and one that is remembered to this day. Also on Tuesday is the birthday of Rebbetzin Chana, the Rebbe's mother, in the year 1879. She was born in Nikolaev, Ukraine, and went on to marry her saintly husband, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Schneerson, at the age of 20. You know, often when you have someone like Rebbetzin Chana, who was the wife of a very well-known Rav and the mother of an even more well-known Rebbe, they can kind of get overshadowed by the towering legacies around them. But that's not the case with Rebbetzin Chana. Her face, her name, and her story are very widely known across the world, and the date of her passing on the 6th of Tishrei is marked on every chassid's calendar. I think a big reason for that is because of who Rebbetzin Chana was. She was a pious, refined, deeply religious woman who spoke to God with an almost childlike sincerity, but at the same time, she was a fiercely determined, resourceful, and impressively street-smart person. When her husband was imprisoned by the Soviet authorities in the year 1939, she wasted no time wringing her hands. She launched a relentless campaign on his behalf. She advocated for him, fought for him, and eventually followed him to his exile in the town of Chili, Kazakhstan, and remained with him until his untimely passing in exile. Check out the link in the show notes for a more detailed biography of Rebbetzin Chana. All right, moving on to Wednesday, we've got a much more recent entry, the passing of Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri just a few short years ago in 2006. Although Rav Kaduri lived in the modern era, he embodied the simple piety of a true Kabbalist of old. He made his living as a bookbinder in Jerusalem after emigrating from Baghdad, where he had studied under the legendary Ben Ish Chai. He was known to many as the eldest of the Kabbalists, and thousands came to him seeking advice and blessing. He passed away at a ripe old age. It's hard to know exactly how old he was, because the year of his birth is unclear, but it was definitely over 100 years old. His funeral was attended by over 500,000 people. Also on Wednesday, we've got our first halachic note of the week. In the afternoon mincha prayer, we're going to skip the portion of Tachnun, being that it's the day preceding Rosh Chodesh. On that note, let's head over to Thursday, the first day of Shavat, which is, of course, Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month. As we do every Rosh Chodesh, we add the half Hallel and Musaf to our morning prayers, and Ya'aleh V'yavo to every prayer throughout the day, as well as the grace after meals. There's a reason we call the first day the head of the month. Just as the head directs the entire body, so too Rosh Chodesh sets the tone for the entire month ahead, so make sure to spend it the right way. In Jewish history, we've got an event that really speaks to me as a rabbi. When my father first introduced me to giving sermons, I was still a kid then, he told me the golden rule is to keep it short. However much you love the sound of your own voice, keep it under 5 minutes, 10 max, and people will like you. Well, that holds true for almost everyone, but not for Moshe Rabbeinu. On this day, the first of Shavat in the year 2448, which, if you're wondering, comes out to about 1313 before the Common Era, Moshe began what is undoubtedly the most epic sermon in the history of sermons, an exhaustive review of the entire Torah that took 37 days and formed the book of Devarim, aka Deuteronomy. So next time your rabbi's speech runs a bit long, this might help give you a little perspective. Also on Thursday, we've got a heartbreaking one. On this day, in the year 878 before the Common Era, King Shaul, the very first Jewish king, was killed in battle with the Philistines along with his 3 sons. King David, who was fighting another battle at the time, was devastated at the news and composed a song of grief to mourn the slain king. On Friday, the 2nd of Shavat, we've got another holiday from the times of the Talmud, this time marking the death of King Alexander Yanai in the year 78 before the Common Era. Alexander Yanai was a Jewish king of the Hashmonae dynasty, a descendant of the famous Maccabees of the Hanukkah story. Unfortunately, he didn't inherit any of their righteousness or morality. During his 27-year reign, he killed so many rabbis and scholars that he became known as the hangman. Even as his own death drew near, he didn't express any remorse. On the contrary, he had 70 distinguished Jews imprisoned in advance and gave orders for them to be executed the moment he died. Why? So that the Jews would be preoccupied with mourning the slaughter instead of celebrating the wicked Yanai's death. Now, fortunately, the king's wife circumvented her husband's sadistic decree. The moment he died, she took his ring of office and, using it as a proof of authority, ordered the 70 elders to be set free. Only once they were safely out of harm's way did she reveal that the king had died. And, just as Yanai had feared, the sages proclaimed the day of his demise as a holiday, and again, that'll be this Friday. Also on Friday, we've got another one of those Purims we love talking about on this show. This time, it's Purim Rome, established in the year 1793. In that year, a mob of anti-Semites converged on the Jewish ghetto in Rome, intending to set it on fire and immolate the Jews inside. Miraculously, though, God caused a tremendous rainstorm to form over the city, and the fire was unable to spread. Ever since then, on the 2nd of Shvat, the Jews of Rome observe their own local Purim in commemoration. And to bring this week in Jewish history to a close, Friday also marks the yahrzeit of a truly iconic figure, Reb Meshulam Zusha of Anipoli in the year 1800. Reb Zusha was a massively accomplished scholar and a saintly Rebbe, but he's famous for his simplicity and humility. He was so self-effacing, he never even referred to himself as I in the first person. It was always Zusha in the third person. Once, when he was walking along a dirt path, he stopped and addressed the earth beneath his feet. "Dirt, dirt," he mused. "You are greater than Zusha, so why is Zusha walking on you?" You know, now that I think of it, he probably wouldn't appreciate being called iconic. And once we're nitpicking the titles here, the name Zusha itself isn't so cut and dry either. Reb Zusha's own colleagues would write his name as Zusman, while other variations on the pronunciation include Zushia, Zisha, Zussel, or my personal favorite, Zusya. I actually have a friend named Zusya, and back in yeshiva in LA, we used to call him Zeus for short. Now, there's no account of Reb Zusha of Anipoli being called Zeus, but from a scientific standpoint, it cannot be ruled out. Now, although Reb Zusha never printed any of his teachings in a book, many of them have been passed down through the generations and preserved, particularly in the books Menorat HaZahav and Butzina Kadisha. And to wrap up today's episode, I'd like to share one of my favorite teachings of Reb Zusha. This one is recorded in the Hasidic calendar Hayom Yom, compiled by the Rebbe, in the entry for the third day of Iyar, and it goes like this. Reb Zusha would learn 7 lessons from a thief. 1. He works quietly without publicizing his accomplishments. 2. He's ready to place himself in danger. 3. He recognizes the importance of even the smallest details. 4. He works very hard. 5. He moves quickly and energetically without laziness or hesitation. 6. He is confident and optimistic. And finally, 7. If he doesn't succeed the first time, he'll try again. In our age of information, there's a lot of ugly to see. So much is vicious, so much is absurd, and so much is downright unfair. And honestly, speaking personally, it could really take a toll on your frame of mind. But what if we could see the world the way Reb Zusha did? Here was a man whose entire life was serving God. Everywhere he looked, even in the ugly places, even a thief, that was all he saw. There is a God in the world. He runs everything that happens. He's taking care of us. And everything you see, God is showing to you for a reason. There's something to be learned from it. Choose to focus on the good, the opportunities for growth and inspiration, and see the places it will take you in the week ahead. Your Jewish Week is produced by Chabad.org, written and recorded by me, Rabbi W. Paltiel. Theme music by Levi Gloshav.